you please welcome Suzanne Whang.
Hi, you guys. So before you start my timer, can I get a show of hands? How many of you were here 2 weeks ago for part 1 of my story? Okay, so a bunch of you weren't. Okay, so let me just give a quick recap before you start my timer. Okay, so 25 years ago, I dated a guy named Rick in Boston, and after a month, we broke up. And the reason we broke up is because he had a female roommate named Anne, and every time I'd go over to his place, she gave me the stink eye, so I was paranoid that he was having sex with her, too. So I decided to say, so is it my imagination, or is Anne mean to me when I come over? And he said, no, it's not your imagination. I said, why is that? And he said, because we're sleeping together. And I was like, oh my God! And he acted so casual about it, what an asshole. So we went to sleep that night, and the next morning I made an excuse to leave. I kissed him goodbye, and I never spoke to him again. And then 10 years later, we reconnected somehow, and he was engaged to be married, not to Anne, but to some woman named Svetlana. He invites me to his wedding. I go. They go on their honeymoon. They come back. He has lunch with me, and he says, can I ask you, what happened 10 years ago to us? I thought things were going great, and I was crazy about you. And I said, well, I wasn't cool enough to handle the fact that you were sleeping with your roommate, Anne. And he says, what are you talking about? I was never sleeping with my roommate, Anne. And I say, what are you talking about? I asked you if she was mean to me, and you said yes, and I said, why? And you said, because we're sleeping together. And he says, yeah, you and me. Not me and her. She had a crush on me. She was jealous of you. What? But what are we going to do with that? Because he just got married, so we separated again for 16 years, and then last fall we reconnected, and it turns out that he is divorced and living in Vermont, and so I was on my way to Vermont to visit him. That's where we left off. Okay, hit it. This is parallel storyline B. 20 years ago, I was living in New York City, and I was cast in a play called My Sister Eileen at the West End Theater. That's funny? Okay. The male lead, an actor named Jay Nickerson, was tall, handsome, dashing, and a brilliant actor. He was smart, charismatic, chivalrous, and had this dry sense of humor. He reminded me of a combination of Gregory Peck, Dick Van Dyke, Jimmy Stewart, and Johnny Carson. He was like a 1940s black and white movie star born in the wrong decade. I was madly in love with him, but he was married, so I had to take my feelings and put them in a compartment on the shelf. We became friends and have been good friends for the past 20 years. There was one moment during the 6 years I lived in New York when Jay was at my apartment and we were sitting in my living room, and we had that moment, that uh-oh, where there was chemistry and tension, and Jay looked at me and said, I should go. And I replied, yes, you should. And he left, because he's a great guy and he is a loyal husband. And for about a month, we didn't speak to each other because we had to sort of let that energy dissipate, and then we were fine again, and we've been close friends ever since. Jay still lives in New York, and he's a special ed junior high school teacher in Brooklyn. 2 years ago, Jay's wife left him, and he was devastated. He has 2 kids who are 14 and 11. We've always been in regular communication, and he was brave enough to put himself back out into the world of dating. He told me all about his dates, and he's always known about my colorful love life. About 6 months ago, I received a letter from Jay via email, written completely in French. Oh my. I speak enough French that I understood about 75% of it, and the rest of it I had to look up. It said, in French, I have been in love with you since the moment we met, but I couldn't do anything about it because I was married. I have 2 kids, which means I cannot relocate until my youngest goes off to college in 6 years. So in 2019, I'm hoping that we can be together. Pardon me if I'm being too forward, but I've had a couple of glasses of wine. Love, Jay. I almost had a heart attack. I replied, I have been in love with you since the moment we met, but I couldn't do anything about it because you were married. On your daughter's graduation day in 2019, meet me at the top of the Empire State Building. Okay, now we're back to where the story left off. On January 24th, I'm on my way to New York City and then Vermont to visit Rick. Now I have to decide whether I want to see Jay before I visit Rick. I'm pretty sure I shouldn't call him. I get to New York, I'm there for a few days, and on the last day that I'm there, I call him and I say, I'm in New York, do you want to have lunch? He has his kids that day, but there's a 3-hour window when he's free, so he drives to a cafe on the Upper West Side to meet me. Keep in mind that we have not seen each other since our profession of love for each other. So I get to the cafe early, and I'm nervous and fluttery for the first time since we met because this is like our first date. I'm sad that our first kiss won't be today, though, because there's no way I want my first kiss with Jay to be in a loud, crowded restaurant. But I'm so excited to see him. He walks into the cafe, and we have our first movie moment when our eyes meet. He may as well have swung into the room like Peter O'Toole in My Favorite Year. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. We have a wonderful time together, and I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to tell him about Rick and the fact that I'm leaving the next day to go to Vermont. As I'm sitting there, I realize that this is my dear friend who I've known for 20 years. I don't want to make him the dumb guy who doesn't know what's going on, and if the roles were reversed, I'd want him to tell me. So I tell him the story. He pauses, looks at me and says, "Wow, that's an amazing story. Of course you're going to Vermont. You have to see Rick. You have to see how that plays out. I just hope that one day you'll come back to me." I thought I was going to faint. What? I had heard about unconditional romantic love, but I had never experienced it before. Every man who has ever fallen in love with me has wanted to break my legs and put me in a cage. There's that expression, if you love someone, set them free. He was telling me that he loves me so much, my happiness is the most important thing to him, and if I'm meant to be with Rick, so be it. I wanted to jump across the table into his arms, but I restrained myself. Then he says, "Are you aware that we met 20 years ago to the year? My sister Eileen was in 1993. I said, "Really? 1993? Wow." And I'm thinking, men don't remember things like that unless it's really important to them or unless they looked it up. Then he says, "Are you also aware that we are currently sitting just around the corner from the West End Theater where we first met?" And I realized, oh my God, we are. We were sitting at a cafe 2 blocks away from the West End Theater on 86th and Broadway, which was on the 2nd floor of the Church of St. Paul in St. Andrew. Now, neither of us had set foot in that building since we did the play 20 years ago, so we weren't even sure if it was still there. I said, "We have to go there after lunch." He said, "Yes, we do." So we leave the restaurant. It's about 10 degrees outside. I'm nervous and excited, feeling what I now call bliss-combobulated, walking next to him on the sidewalk. He offers me his hand. He doesn't grab my hand. He offers his hand like a knight in shining armor, like Lancelot. I take his hand, and I am instantly transported back to being 16 years old with my first boyfriend, George. I had never been in love before, and the way I knew I was in love with George was the way it felt when he held my hand. It was like this whoosh feeling. I hadn't thought about that moment until now when I experienced exactly the same thing. Whoosh. We turn the corner to 86th and Broadway, and the theater is still there. We walk up the stairs, and it's like we're 2 kids in Disneyland with all the memories flooding back. We peek inside the theater, then we walk back down the stairs, we open a door, and all of a sudden, we're inside the chapel. Wow, it's breathtaking. Neither of us had ever been inside the chapel part of the church. There's no one inside, so we have the whole place to ourselves. We sit in the front row, holding hands, looking around in awe and reverence of the beauty of the sanctuary. And Jay says, "I think this would be the perfect place for our first kiss." Oh. I was just thinking the same thing, so I say, "I think so too." So for our next movie moment, he turns to me, cups my face in his hands, and gently kisses me. It's the best first kiss of my life. And then he has to go pick up his kids. He wishes me a wonderful adventure in Vermont, and he's gone. Oh my God. The next day, oh shit, I'll wrap it up. The next day I leave for Vermont. I don't have to do this next week. The next day I leave for Vermont. I keep my heart open to whatever happens. Rick picks me up at the train station, and it's instantly clear to me that we weren't meant to fall in love or get married. There is no romantic or sexual chemistry for either of us. There is a strong friendship affinity, and we're like soul brother and sister or spiritual twins, but there is no love spark. One day into my trip, I text Jay, "I miss you." He texts back, "It took everything in my power not to text you. I haven't thought about church this much in years." But then he writes, I can't be a distraction while you're in Vermont with Rick. What? Wow. Once again, he's going to be the classy, chivalrous prince. He's smart because the worst thing would be for me not to give Rick a real chance, and Jay didn't want to be with me if he thought I was pining for what might have been with Rick. He was right. So I put my feelings for Jay back on the shelf and was fully present with Rick for a week. We had a great time together and we'll be lifelong friends, but it never evolved into anything but a wonderful platonic friendship. When I returned to New York via Amtrak, I texted Jay, while Rick and I will be lifelong friends, there is no romance here. Would you like to pick me up at Penn Station and drive me to the airport? Jay replied, the only thing I would like more than that would be to drive you all the way to Los Angeles. Oh. The next day we have another movie moment. He's waiting for me at Penn Station and we have kiss number 2. Then he drives me to the airport to send me off to Los Angeles with kiss number 3. That was 3 weeks ago. And now we are in a full-fledged long-distance romance. Our song is called A Kiss to Build a Dream On by Louis Armstrong. He is the one. I have never been happier in my life. Tonight's theme is Close Call. I almost didn't call Jay when I got to New York, but thank God I did. Real old-fashioned romance is alive and well. And guess what? Right now is Jay's spring break from teaching junior high school, so he flew out here and he's